Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and now that my obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And I know I just recently did a video covering one of Omar's videos, but he did another one. I just saw it come through my feed. In fact, this video, I might not even get this one up for a couple of days because of all the other current events that are going on. But Omar did a video, and I felt like the direction he went in the video was not really what the title said. And it was a case of saying that strength program might be hurting your gains, is basically what he implied. So let me put on my +5 hat of speechcraft, lovingly called my +5 hat of autism by many of you. And someone said in the comments the other day, man, this guy is autistic AF. Well, it's because my hat gives me a +5 bonus to it. So let's get over to the point. Omar addressed a lot of things, and I think they're valid points, but I also think that people need to understand that when we are talking about strength, only in the bodybuilding world, I think, do people really make this enormous separation between size and strength. Whereas for someone like me is serious about strength, to me, everything is kind of a weave and a flow with all of it. Meaning, you can't get stronger without getting bigger. You can't get bigger without getting stronger. I don't like to think of training in terms of this is strength work versus this is hypertrophy work. I like to think of it in terms of maybe performance elements, right? Strength, stamina, maximum strength, speed strength, starting strength, accumulation of workload, metabolic fatigue. I think these are better ways to look at it, because when you look at it from that perspective, because he kind of really broke things into, well, just doing really heavy weight with high intensity to peak your strength, which is pushing you in the direction of max strength, but honestly, it's almost just general strength. I mean, working at 80%, 85% isn't really peaking either. That's not max strength. You have to go above 90% to peak max strength. But what is that? A lot of that is motor unit learning, neuromuscular efficiency, utilizing the hypertrophy that you have efficiently for a high intensity exertion. That's all that is. But that's the thing is that when we talk about real strength training, and you step away from like the bodybuilding or things like the hypertrophy range, which is kind of what he tried to talk about, of separating things into blocks. I understand what he's saying, but the point that people need to remember is that if you're not inducing hypertrophy, you're not gaining strength. And therein lies our dilemma. Meaning you can train in a way that will give you a little more strength than hypertrophy, but if you're training and gaining hypertrophy maximally, you're still gaining strength at a pretty large rate. And for example, I mean, he's working with Greg there, and Greg's actually done some work with Dr. Brad, and I don't even always like everything Dr. Brad does. I call him Dr. Brad Broenfeld, because he tries to promote bodybuilding bro methods and kind of make his science look like it supports it at times when it doesn't always. But even he kind of made a note that when you did high volumes of triples with a heavier weight, right, that 3 sets of 7, or 7 sets of 3, produced the same amount of hypertrophy that 3 sets of 10 did. But it took longer. People complained about more fatigue, but they gained slightly more strength with the same amount of muscle mass. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. Because all of our training to some extent should be geared for a hypertrophic effect. It should be geared for a hypertrophic effect. And what you see, though, is unfortunately as intensity goes up, the amount of training fatigue that you accumulate relative to the training response becomes a problem. And I think that's ultimately the problem we run into with too much higher intensity work. It's not that higher intensity work in large volumes doesn't cause hypertrophy. It does. It absolutely does. That's not even subject to debate. The problem is that you start running out of how much volume you can tolerate. You start running into how much workload can you tolerate and can you recover from, which that is what limits your workload. And that's the point that he made there. And that's the reason a lot of times you see like classical linear periodization done in blocks, but it's not always done the way Omar described of working on one or the other for 4 months. I mean, classic linear periodization, you might be going with 10s for a 3-week block, maybe 8s for the next block, 5s, then 3s, and then all the way down to singles, right? You get down to those 3s, you're getting pretty heavy. And then you peak and try to get up to 1 rep maxes, and that might be the way it works. And that's actually done, over just over a 3-month period of time there, to where you're starting with 10s and working your way heavier. But then when we're dealing with more concurrent periodization, we weave this stuff into the same weeks. You might actually be doing really high volume triples That's one method with a lower intensity than is really a 3-rep max, meaning you could be doing 7 or 10 sets of 3 at 80% instead of doing them at 85%. Doesn't accumulate as much fatigue, but it still lets you focus on speed and power. And then you're mixing that with really heavy days on different days in the same week, whereas you might be hitting max singles, max triples, things like that. That's one method. Another method that's done with that could be to work on speed strength or just straight volume work. You know, guys do sets of 8 to 10 for volume and lower sets, though, on their volume-oriented days, and then they're going really heavy on their maximum effort type days. Done in the same week, and it's all programmed. That's a different way that it's addressed, so that you train them on different days. And that's things that are used, or you get into stuff like what I'm doing with a West Side-ish type system, to where you have max effort days, and then you have your real specificity of training right there, where you can practicing contest lift with singles. Is part of it, the way I do it. That's a bit of a different nuanced thing. And then you have dynamic effort days, and then you add in additional metabolic work with higher reps for your weak points, right, throughout the week. Because realistically, aren't you going to hypertrophy from doing dynamic effort work? Of course you are. There's a lot of training volume there, and it's not that hard to recover from. That creates hypertrophy. But you're still going to have weak links. And that's ultimately the problem we run into with the always lifting heavy all the time, is that your weaker links might need more training volume to bring them up more. In which case, it doesn't always make sense at a certain threshold to train all those exercises and body parts with really heavy weight, because if we're only concerned with maximum strength through our key movement patterns, which will carry over to other things, you still gain neuromuscular efficiency from that. Let's say we'll just use the classical 3 powerlifting lifts: squat, bench, deadlift. If you get really powerful with those 3, your whole body is more or less trained to do heavy singles. You are training yourself for maximum strength through most of the body. That will carry over to other exercises to a large extent, and people forget that. Especially things like squat and deadlift. That will carry over to maximum strength on some other movement patterns. But you get to a point to say, okay, when you start looking at these comparisons, when people are doing block training or exclusively one versus the other, what do you find? What do we find? That sometimes we're just getting the one performance element. But here's the thing, you can do your smaller exercises with lighter weight and more volume just to accumulate the workload and fatigue that you can recover from. Because you know what? Doing some sets of 10 on rows, or curls, or lateral raises, or face pulls, or anything like that, 10, 15 rep sets, they don't really accumulate the same fatigue hitting those lifts we with maximum weights would do, in terms of, again, the effect on your nervous system. So you can accumulate those with higher volume, but you're not worried about maximum strength on those smaller movements, right? So you don't necessarily need to train them with low reps. So you're just worried about fatigue and accumulating workload to grow on, and you're already getting your general strength training from the heavy days and heavy lifts anyways. So you can absolutely mix these things together, and it's all strength training though. And that's the thing that we need to kind of get out of this mindset of, yes, like someone like me, my ultimate goal is strength, but you're not going to get maximally strong without getting maximally big, right? The only reason people have this idea in their head that you can really fully separate them is because of heavy drug abusing bodybuilders who also use site enhancement. We know that as drug doses go up, again, cite Greg Nuckols. He's working with Greg Nuckols on this stuff. Greg has done research on this, and he found the threshold of drug use to where, in his own research, to where you start gaining size faster than strength. That up to a certain point, even drug users, just like naturals, gain size and strength in a certain ratio, and as drug doses go up, the muscle growth starts to exceed the strength, and as the dose gets higher, it will get more and more. A larger discrepancy appears the more you use at any given time. So you have that, and then you have all the site enhancement. So in other words, if a guy's got whatever, a 20-inch arm, and who has a certain strength level, and you see a bodybuilder who has a 23-inch arm because he's injecting oil into it, but they have the same amount of muscle, the bodybuilder's arm is still going to be bigger in measurement. It doesn't mean it's got more muscle. So you also have the whole site enhancement thing that kind of skews some of the proportions and stuff also, because all bodybuilders do site enhancement. All enhanced bodybuilders use site enhancement. Like that's understood in those circles. They all do it. It's the norm. Very few do not. Like when I say all, I mean there could be exceptions, but that guy would be really rare. There's also people who win the lottery, but you're probably not going to win $1 million at the lottery. Let's just be honest. Just like there's a bodybuilder somewhere out there who probably doesn't, who's at the pro level. Okay, he's probably out there, just like there's a person who won the lottery. But best of luck finding them. It's not going to be you. So you go over to that point though, things get skewed there. And I think that's what Omar kind of loses a little bit of sight of, in the sense that all normal, well-written strength training programs for the non-novice, we're not talking about the novice. When you were dealing with the novice, everything is just straight sets, no periodization. It's not necessary. Just heavy, basic, hard work and linear progression works great in your first year in the gym. Right? That's how you build your base. Again, everything has been tried under the sun. We know that works best. That's not even a subject of debate anymore, I would hope. More advanced lifters, though, these things are rotated into phases, or they are rotated into individual days or even individual exercises. Right? They're rotated into individual exercises. And this is how all coaches program top strength athletes, in some of these sort of manners. So everyone, other than very extreme examples like the Bulgarian style training, which of course Greg promotes and writes books on, which again he's working with on that, and Omar's helped promote that book, which is the most extreme example of all intensity all the time with no real, you would think of as hypertrophy work. But outside of something like that, higher volumes of training are always incorporated and woven into all strength programs. So when people get this idea that strength training just represents one thing or one single rep range, that's not true. Peaking for maximum strength does, but that's not always done in phases. That could just be with individual exercises. And I mean, we're reaching a point to where when we say what's traditional, what's classic, like when people think of it as, oh, this is a classical thing that people do to peak strength over here, right? But for most of you, that's in the days of your grandparents, right? That's not something that was even done in your dad's day. So at a certain point, what are we calling classical anymore? Right? When you have serious world record holding powerlifters for 20 years, have been doing it a different way to where they simply have max effort work on certain days and then more volume and dynamic and other stuff on other days. And that's how they peak their strength. Not saying all do that. It's one popular method. What are we calling classic anymore? Is linear block periodization classic? Or is conjugate periodization classic? What's classic at this point? I don't know that we can look at it that way. So, I mean, I understand what Omar is trying to say, that there is benefits to utilizing multiple rep ranges, but that's back to what we're talking about. Size and strength have to go together. You can't fully separate the two to any great extent, and you're not going to get stronger without getting bigger. You really aren't, guys. You really aren't. Barring a little bit of neuromuscular efficiency and some small amount of peaking. But that's short-lived. Meaning all you're doing when you're in a strength peaking phase of some type is you are maximizing the neuromuscular efficiency and motor pattern on an exercise for the muscle that you've already built. But without the muscle there, you don't get stronger. In other words, if you do one peaking phase 6 months after a different peaking phase you did, but you didn't gain any muscle between the two peaking phases, like no hypertrophy, you won't get stronger in the next peaking phase. It's not going to happen. So, with the point we come back around to is I think what he's trying to state is your peaking phase in your training might not be gaining you much muscle. But strength athletes all do higher volumes of training and higher workload training as part of their training, whether they do it in individual phases or whether they do it in individual exercises or on individual days in their training. That's just a normal part of strength training. And it's almost a mindset of only bodybuilders are stepping back and separating that out. Right? It's a very dogmatic view because a lot of bodybuilders don't understand the correlation with size and strength, and so they think in terms of just high volume training all the time, and then they wonder why they have to keep upping the dose of their drugs continually. Because you can't just sit there and do nothing but sets of 10 all day long forever and expect to keep getting bigger because you're not gaining as much strength as you could. Therefore, your strength doesn't always go up as quick as it could on your higher rep sets because you haven't gained neuromuscular efficiency. You're just working on work capacity and hypertrophy. And once that stalls, you're done. All you can do is up the dose, bro. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.